The idea came to fruition from really an observation that MadMen, for those of you, and I'll give you a little bit of background on what MadMen's about, but the program itself, we see some real truth in as it relates to both the history of our great practice of marketing, but also some of the great reasons why it's not particularly well viewed, let's just say, by a lot of other aspects of the corporation, that being the CEO and the CFO. And there's a lot of stories and interesting dynamics that happened really at the birth of our practice of marketing and advertising. You know, if you think back to the late 30s, 40s, and where this show takes place, which is a fictional strategic marketing agency, or really an advertising agency in the 1960s, there were a lot of things that were done back then that, whether we like it or not, we kind of have to live with today. And some of it's good, and some of it's bad. And the talk today is really going to be focused on looking at some of the truth, if you will, that we live with and as part of our nostalgia of our practice of marketing, and also to kind of see where we've evolved. Because there's also some very interesting things that have happened, as many of you in the room know, whether you've been in marketing for the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, like people like me. It's really changed dramatically, and when you're in the boat going down the river, sometimes you miss some of the milestones and landmarks along the way. So I'm going to use this analogy with MadMen to help highlight those for you, and hopefully, like I said, give you some good takeaway value. So we're going to start with the first one, and I said this is really, for those of you that know me, that have seen me present before, you know that I usually put the punchline right at the beginning. I think this really is the one that characterizes one of the major shifts that's gone on in marketing and advertising over the past 50 to 60 years. It really comes down to this shift, a gradual shift from the persuasive art of marketing and persuasion really as the expertise at the core of every great marketing or advertising agency, and a shift more to authenticity, right? And we're going to look at some great examples of this. And many of you in this room probably are feeling this in your business, the importance of a very authentic, very genuine positioning within your companies, within the brands that you work with, and even right down to your own role as a consumer in terms of how you tweet and how you talk about different things in your life. That level of authenticity has shot through the roof. Just within the past 10 years, quite frankly. But now it's the standard bearer, really, for how you go to market. And that's had a dramatic impact on our culture, not just within firms, but across the board. Let me talk about the shifting the second gear into process. And again, I'm going to show you a couple clips here, which I think are particularly funny. In the birth of advertising, and even to this day to some extent, and marketing is about observation. I mean, the best marketers I've ever worked with, someone was asking me at the beginning about Sergio Zeman. One of the things I thought was great about Sergio was he was an amazing salesperson, former CMO of Coca-Cola. I don't necessarily think he wasn't best at marketing, but he was a great sales guy. And he was also great at what I call observational strategy, meaning that he could look at a room like this and he could say, all the women are wearing this kind of shoe. And he would kind of come up with these very obtuse sort of combinations, and you'd go, that's really a good insight, but what do I do with it, right? A lot of what happened in the 60s was really kind of fine-tuning this idea of observational research and the foundation of what we today call market research or consumer insights. So I'm going to talk about that, and also I want to talk about kind of where things have evolved and how it shows up in our day-to-day advertising. Let me shift gears into the third piece now, which is technology. And again, we're going to talk about technology from the standpoint of media and sort of what's available for distribution of these messages and how that's evolved since the 60s. Again, I'm going to show you this clip, and I'm probably going to cut it short, but just a quick setup here. Again, as I mentioned, this fictitious agency was still, in the early 60s, it was all about print, really. There were other forms, events, and other things that they were doing, but the majority of the advertising was print-oriented, and they were, buying media, buying print, and developing content. This clip is actually the birth of the television department at MadMen, at Sterling Cooper. Pretty clever, huh? Let me go in now to the fourth bucket, which is measurement. And again, I think the biggest things that have changed is that in the early days, in the 60s, and certainly around the MadMen timeframe, the idea of measuring impact of advertising or of marketing activities was pretty immature. It's probably the best way to describe it. I'm going to show you some clips to give some examples. But all you could really do is look at the brand and look at their sales, right? And everything was very much, we put essentially things into the marketplace, and we measure the outcome, we measure the sales efforts associated with that. And there are numerous clips throughout the show where they talk about, why is the client coming in? The client's coming in because they want to review what we're doing. Let's quick get the sales numbers and see if we're in trouble, right? So everything was very much a retrospective, looking back. Let's make sure we're not going to be in trouble. And if sales were up, let's beat our chest and say it's because of the great advertising we've produced for you. And we all know, again, in today's world, in a multi-channel world, it's just not that simple anymore. I'm going to finish up on one of my favorites, which is kind of brings us full circle back to culture, and that is organization. And I think we all know, and this is not unique to marketing, we all know that from the 1960s through into the 1990s, the dominant form of organization in most large companies was a bureaucracy, a hierarchy. This is actually kind of a funny little graphic. For those of you that, again, watch the show, you'll know that the show was actually acquired, that the Sterling Cooper agency was acquired by a British agency called Putnam, Powell & Lowell, no doubt a predecessor agency of WPP today, right? And they came in and they bought it, and they slowly started to kind of make changes, and their way of making changes was to change lines on boxes on charts, right? So you've got Don Draper over here with his creative department and all of his smart art designers and all of his copy editors. You've got Bertram Cooper over here as the chairman emeritus, and the funny thing here is that Roger Sterling, his partner, was kind of etched in at the last minute. They forgot to put him on the chart, which you can imagine would happen today in any kind of an agency acquisition, that the founder may not be on the chart anyplace to be found. So they hand wrote Roger in. And then there's a whole group of people here. Again, this little television department has now become kind of subsumed by the overall operations of the business. What does that sound like? And so a lot of the account services and execution and media buying kind of fall up into this guy from Britain, Guy McKendrick, who you'll learn a lot more about at the end here. But Guy is kind of parachuted in from the UK to take over, essentially, the agency, much to the chagrin of Roger Sterling and Don Draper and many of the team on the ground. But the point here is that it's a command and control culture environment, command and control structure. And as a result of that, you end up with some very interesting client relationships. Let me close with just some key takeaways, because I blew through a lot of content in the spirit of not giving you indigestion. I wanted to kind of entertain first and give you some takeaways as well, so there's some value for you when you go home this afternoon or go to your job or wherever you're off to, golf course. Again, the key takeaway here is back to the tagline of the show, which is where the truth lies. And there's both some truth and some, let's say, less than truth in a lot of the things that this show represents. But I wanted to kind of give you kind of some of the meaty points, such that you have some things that you can think about for your own business. Again, organized around these 5 buckets. The key takeaways, again, on the first piece, culture, really what I think we've evolved into is away from just pure persuasion. There's always persuasion in advertising, but we've evolved into more of an authentic level of persuasion. And I think even more importantly, inside of that, I think where most companies and most marketers have moved is away from an authoritative approach, like Don said. Remember, I'll tell people what they should buy, right? I don't run across too many marketers anymore that think that way. They may think it, or they may feel that sometimes, but fundamentally they're not really going to market that way. What they're really going to market around is advocacy. How can I bring more people together? How can I follow more people on Twitter? How can I create more pull for my products and services? And not tell people what to do, but encourage them or engage them in different ways. And I think that's a key distinction between the 1960s and today. The second area that we talked about was process. And again, I gave some examples of observation and quantitative. And for those market research folks in the room, you know that even to this day, observational, qualitative views of the marketplace and target audiences is very compatible with quantitative. I think the distinction I was making there was that in the 60s, we didn't really have the level of commitment to quantitative research that we see today. And things seemed very ad hoc and very observational without a lot of fact base behind them. And the most powerful marketing that I've seen in recent years has been really good at combining the best of both worlds. asking customers to essentially describe need states or opportunities for filling white space, while at the same time backing it up with some hard facts, because as we all know, a lot of times people will say one thing and do something else, and it's hard to rely strictly on just consumer interaction or customer interaction to define strategy. I also think some of the other, I didn't talk about this in great detail, but the power of an agency, whether we like it or not, has really diminished. And what's happened, and what we saw with the Doritos campaign, for example, is there's more power in the hands of consumers now than ever before. And the companies and marketers that are succeeding are the ones that are tapping into that power as opposed to trying to fight it. And we all know, and there may be even some brands in the room right now that feel like they're in a war or a battle with their consumers for positioning. And what I would argue, and what we talk to our clients about, is give it up. Consumers have the power, and it's good. It's a very good thing, because you can leverage that power, and you can use that and redirect that power in ways that we never could before, right? It's a very outside-in view as opposed to an inside-out or insular view of, I'm right, I'll tell you what to do, right? In technology, we focused a lot on the broadcast and crowdcast, so I won't go too much into that, but again, I think this is an era of opportunity, where in the past there were very few forms of media, right? Print, radio, TV, that was about it. You could put some things around the edges. We have so many different ways to influence today. And the real challenge for most marketers is, how do you get the right mix? How do you get the right combination? Because every product, every service that you represent has a different profile or a different combination that's really the optimal combination. And that's where, again, Top Right does a lot of work in helping people to understand that many-to-many relationship and make the right choices. Measurement, I know we all feel this, but I talked about the shift from awareness to conversion, not just what was sold, but what will be sold and how to sell more. Again, there's a whole host of other metrics that we now have at our disposal as marketers. And you'll notice I don't have things up there like GRPs and CPMs and traditional advertising metrics. Those are important, but let's cut through the BS, right? Most companies want to know what the ROI is. They want to know what your net promoter score is. They want to know, what's gotten sold at what profit margin. Those are the facts that most CEOs and CFOs want to essentially operate the business around. So we as marketers have had to essentially move in that direction, and I think rightly so. I think it's a good thing. And then finally, on the last point, this kind of shift from machine bureaucracy, very structured, very command and control, to more of a, the best ideas may not be inside these four walls. The best ideas may be out there, but because they're out there doesn't mean they need to be in here to be doing the work. They can be out there, we can be in here, we can do work together, we can collaborate, we can create much more dynamic messaging and much more dynamic go-to-market strategies. And we have to stop thinking about marketing as a function and think about marketing as an extension of our enterprise. It's our business. I mean, I challenge anyone to push back on the fact that marketing is the key driver of organic growth in just about every business. Heck, I'd say in every economy in the world today. And if you're not doing great marketing, if you're not really fundamentally shifting the game, you're not a marketer, from my perspective. So it's not living in an ivory tower and living in a department anymore. It's basically you are an extension of the growth strategy of the business. And it's enterprise-wide, guys. It's not a silo. And then finally, hierarchical versus virtual, we touched on this. Some of the best companies I'm working with today have taken a view that a lot of the world around us has changed, and it's made it so easy to collaborate across borders, across product lines, across categories, across distribution channels. Why not leverage it and embrace it as opposed to trying to put barriers and contracts and things in the way of natural flow of information about products and services? Like I said, especially with things like the online world, we all know the more you try to control it, the less you have control. Right? And that will continue, and it's not something that we can actually turn around quickly. You might as well figure out a way to essentially play within the new rules as opposed to trying to define your new world in terms of old worlds, like the world of MadMen of the 1960s.